Hi everyone, this is the second part of our interview with John Hoorigan of Bank of Cyprus. Mr. Hoorigan, the X-ray of the NPLs shows us that the majority of these loans belong to big enterprises, and generally we're talking about very large loans.
Well, again, I think it's important that we deal in the facts. Sometimes the truth is an inconvenience to the listener. And it is the case that about half of our non-performing loans sit in what we would describe as the corporate space. And that about 5 billion of those relate to some of the larger groups. But of course, the definition of that captures all of their businesses, who are the employers on the island, as well as in some cases a vanity project or two. Okay, But the non-performing statistics in the large space are more or less the same as they are in the SME space, and they're a little better in the retail space. So the bad behavior across the book is in all segments of the book, not just the large space. So we need to be fair and honest when we describe the non-performance in our book. The non-performing loans have been coming down in the larger space, but they have been growing in the SME and retail space. As you would expect in an economy as it continues to contract, you would expect the more statistical part of the economy, the SME and retail space, to actually continue to have delinquency. And that's exactly what we see in our book. But just for the avoidance of doubt, the larger exposures have been shrinking, and the household and SME debt has been growing. So we have to be, I think, at least fair. We are as aggressive as we can be in the restructuring of the large cases, being careful to ensure that we protect viable businesses who employ the people who also have difficulties in the other parts of the book. And this is the delicate balance that I, as a non-emotional manager, have to balance as we go through this economy. Now, the good signs are that the economy appears to be stabilizing and possibly even starting to grow. That statistically, if you look across the rest of Europe, is the moment at which the property market stabilizes, and it is the moment at which you have your most pain. So I am optimistic for the turn in Cyprus, which is why I think the debate needs to change.
A scene of the bank belongs to the past since last week. I'm referring to Uniastrum. What can you tell us about that?
Look, Uniastrum was, in my view, and I'm not going to sort of express any view on the motivations for acquiring it, but it was a disastrous commercial acquisition. We paid quite a lot of money for it, and it has cost us in all of that money, and we have sold it for virtually nothing. Now, the sale of Uniastrum is incredibly important to the risk reduction in the bank. It takes away liquidity risk. There was 2,500 employees, 120 or up to 170 branches at various times, spread across the whole of Russia in a language and a law we don't understand or are familiar with, and selling it and finding it a new owner for those people, but also taking that risk off our balance sheet is an enormous positive for this group. And our shareholders, who I've spoken to, who have all expressed their satisfaction with the sale of Uniastrum. It has been an adventure in a negative sense for this bank, as it had done in a number of other countries. So we owned banks in Romania, we had exposures in Serbia, we had a bank in the Ukraine, we had a bank in Russia. We of course had a Greek exposure which actually made more strategic sense given the cultural ties between the countries. But now we have a Cyprus bank and a UK bank, both of which in my view make sense for Bank of Cyprus to own. But Uniastrum is a sorry tale in the history of a corporate, and with a bad deal that we now have confined to history.
Are there any thoughts to enter London's stock exchange and leave Athens?
So let me be clear. So the board has not yet made a decision on it, but it is my very clear view that I've expressed a number of times that I believe we should be exploring being on a more liquid, index-driven exchange, which means that you would expect us to be looking at the Amsterdam Bourse or the London exchange. The governance requirements and how you run the company, ours are much more similar to London than they are to Amsterdam, so that should give you an indication of where our eyes are looking. No decision made yet, but it will be my intention to look at de-Greeking this bank in terms of its exposure to Athens and having it on a much better and more sensible exchange, such as London. But I'm not saying we're doing it, I'm saying we're exploring it.
Is it a decision that could be made before you leave the bank?
Well, my advice to our business will be that we should be absolutely looking at that. You have to have the conditions of the accounts have to be, you know, of a certain duration. There has to be you have to make sure that you don't have qualified accounts. You have to have a working capital statement. There are a lot of technical requirements to be put in place before you can actually do it. And we are making sure that all of the technical requirements necessary are in place before we have to make the decision. So that should give you, again, a good hint as to where we're driving this discussion.
Yeah. How would you compare your time as a banker in Cyprus with other experiences you had so far?
You know, Cyprus has been a very welcoming place, and because it's a very small place, everybody knows you, so you have nowhere to hide. So it's felt very welcoming, and there have been moments where I've wondered why I took the job, because there are always moments in everyone's job, no matter what you're doing, where you have highs and lows. But the good thing is, I think there have been more highs than lows, and I think, looking back, I think we've made a difference, the team. And I lead a team of people. It's not just me. It's, you know, the whole team at Bank of Cyprus is truly excellent. We have a great team, and they are focused on trying to do what's right for the bank, but also they're focused on trying to do what's right for their country, and they feel it. And I've been very proud to be associated with that. I haven't had that sort of emotional attachment to a country's future in any job I've had before. So Cyprus is very special in that way, where actually you feel like you are doing something that's really important for the country as much as it's important for the business you work for. And that's been the real distinguishing factor.
Is that because of the size of the bank and the effect that it has on the economy in general?
Yeah, I think it's two things. It's first, you're the two largest banks on the island, where all of the economic problems of a decade of sort of excessive lending and loose policy were warehoused in the Bank of Cyprus. All of the anger around the destruction of deposits and the extinguishing of equity and bonds was warehoused in the Bank of Cyprus. And then the bank was told to get back on its feet and go run a marathon. And this, so then everyone looks and says, well, of course, you know, let's ignore the history, fix the bank. And that is, so it is a very peculiar circumstance where a lot of the country's issues were not dealt with by the country because it couldn't afford it. They were dealt with in the bank. So much more connected than perhaps any other bank in any other country.
Are the disadvantages of Cyprus affected in any way your decision to leave the bank?
No, look, I've been 2 years separated from my young family. I have a 7-year-old son who was 5 when I came here, and I've got 3 other children and a wife. And actually that disconnect, you know, for us to take this company through its next chapter requires a commitment for multiple years. And I didn't feel that I could commit for multiple more years to Cyprus, so I informed the board that as a result of that, after 2 years in Cyprus and having delivered chapter 1, I thought this was an appropriate time for me to step out and head back west towards Ireland, because I think that's a more, you know, more natural place for me to spend the next chapter of my own life.
And your projection on the economy, the Cyprus economy?
I think all of the hard work has been done, but we run the risk of thinking the crisis is over. This crisis is not over. We must drive through the rest of the reforms that are required, and we must get behind a really aggressive plan to grow this country in order for this crisis to be put into history. So I am optimistic, 100% optimistic. I think the finance minister and the government and the president have done a good job of setting a great agenda. I think the reforms that continue to need to be done, we need some more labour law reform. We need to make sure the law works. We need to declutter the courts. We need a plan. We need focus. And of course, we need to also make sure that we don't have the wrong conversations going into May 2016 in the elections, because that could derail growth. And I think we need to recognize that Cyprus competes with every other country in the world for investment. And Cyprus desperately needs investment, and it isn't on the island, it is off the island. So I think it's awfully important that we have a mature and real and sometimes difficult conversation with ourselves in order to ensure that we present the best case. It is very good that Cyprus has differentiated itself from Greece in the last year. That's not a sin, because the cultural and linguistic ties are always going to be there. But Cyprus is different. It has better law. It has a tax collection system. It has a different level of education. It has English as a core language in its DNA. It has tax treaties that work with the rest of the world. And it has the real possibility of growing out of its problems if it focuses. So I'm optimistic for Cyprus, very much so. But there are dangers if we think the crisis is over.
I am impressed on the fact that you mentioned at least 3 times the conversation on the elections in 2016. It seems that you really got the atmosphere in Cyprus. So what is the danger?
Well, the danger is we start discussing the wrong things. As a father, if I want to get my true view on what I think, I look at the world through the eyes of my youngest child. And I ask myself, am I making the right decisions for his or her future in everything I'm doing? And the risk about 4-year election cycles is that we have conversations about just winning the election and making promises in the here and now, instead of building rock solid foundations so that my kids don't have to emigrate, so that my kids can be proud to be part of the country they grew up in, and indeed that I give back to them the money I have taken from them by overspending during my lifetime. And I think this is one of the very important things about good government, good politics, and societal responsibility, is that we look at whether or not we're creating a better future for the next generation than the one we've had ourselves. And I think there is a real risk across the whole world that the next generation has a less attractive lifestyle and life than we do, because we have geared the world too high. I mean, at the last count, in a McKinsey report that I read recently, the world, excluding its banking sector, was $199 trillion borrowed. And that grew by 57 trillion during the financial crisis. So we are borrowing during a crisis and loading that debt onto future taxpayers. And that in a nutshell is our responsibility to reverse.
Thank you very much for this interview. Wish you all the best for the future, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much.